So you all see the screen. Fatima, did you watch the video?
Yeah.
Okay. Does it make a little bit of sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Emily, you heard that. Okay. So when it's first of all, we talked about solving quadratic equations by finding the square roots. Well, now this next method, 16.2, is talking about solving quadratic equations by using the zero product property. And on this, if it says find the zeros of f of x equals x times x plus 8, well, when you watched that video today, you were reminded of the zero product property, saying that anytime you have two factors, if one number times another number equals 0, what does that tell you about one of the numbers, Emily? If you're multiplying one number times another number and it's equal to 0, like a times b is equal to 0, what does that tell you about one of those numbers?
That is 0.
That one of them has to be 0, right? Yeah. So that's what the zero product property means. If you've got the product, if you're multiplying two things and you get 0, that means one of those numbers has to be 0. Do they both have to be 0?
No.
No, a could be 7, and if b is 0, then 7 times 0 would give you 0, right? So when it talks about finding the zeros of an equation or of a function, that just means, and it was described in the video this morning, that just means find out what does the value of x have to be when y is equal to 0. So if you're told to find the zeros of this function or to solve this equation, that means, first thing that means to do is make your y value 0. So you want to rewrite that as saying, instead of writing f of x, that means you want to write, okay, that means if I want to find the zeros, that means y has to be 0, and I want to find out what would x times x plus 8 have to be in order to make that 0. Well, going back to the zero product property here, Emily, you had an idea?
No, it looks so much easier when it's put that way.
Yeah, it really is. So now, when you're looking at this, notice x is one of the factors, x plus 8 is the other factor. So that's like, the x is like your a value over here, the x plus 8 is like your b value. So that means either x has to be 0 or x plus 8 has to be 0. And if one of those is 0, then it's going to give you that equation to make it equal to 0. So to solve this, that means you want to say, all right, x can be 0 or x plus 8 can be 0. And if either one of those is true, then that's going to give you that equation to make it equal to 0. So at this point, you just solve for each of those equations. Well, this is already solved. X is 0, there's nothing to do with that. And then when you solve this equation over here, if you subtract 8 from both sides, what do you get? X equals -8. So your solution is x equals 0 or -8. And the solution, that's just another word for zeros of the solution. So when they talk about zeros of the function, so when they talk about zeros of the function, that just means solve it. So if you were to go back into this equation, if x is 0, 0 plus 8 is 0, and then 0 plus 8 is 8, and then 8 times 0 is 0. Or if x is -8, -8 plus 8 is 0, and then 0 times the -8 right there would give you 0. So those are the x values that make that equation true. Those are the zeros of the function or the solution to the equation. On 6, now you'll see problems like this where it tells you to solve the equation. And if you have to solve the equation, again, that means find the value of x when y is 0. So if you want to solve this, you can say, all right, let me change the color of this ink. You can say, all right, x squared plus 14x plus 49 equals 0. Now in the example that you watched on the video, Fatima, what did it talk about doing for something like this?
Factor.
Yeah, just now go back to what you know about factoring trinomials. If you want to solve this, a way to solve it is to think, can I break this up into two factoring binomials? And so if you factor that, I'm going to just rewrite that trinomial as the product of two binomials. And if you factor that, you say, all right, it's got to be x and x. Everything is plus, so it's got to be plus and plus. And now think about what the factors of 49 are that will give you a sum of 14,
7.
7, and 7, right? Yeah, so if you were to multiply these two binomials, that'll give you x squared plus 14x plus 49. Well, Emily, why do you think we wrote it like this? What does this remind you of now from that problem we just did?
Well, you can just put like, can't you just like make it like into like the x plus 7 squared? Like,
You absolutely could. And then you could, all right, I like what you're thinking. Look at that for a second. If you did, think about this. What would you do then, based on what we've talked about, what you've done the last couple of days?
square root it and then subtract 7.
Yeah, you could get square root both sides, and you get x plus 7 equals square root of 0, and then x plus 7 equals 0, and then subtract 7 from both sides. Outstanding. So you could absolutely use the square root method to solve that. Now, what if we wanted to use the factoring method and the zero product property? You see, x plus 7 is one factor and x plus 7 is the other factor. That means one of these has to be equal to 0 in order to get a product of 0. So you could say, all right, x plus 7 could be 0, or that would be this one, or this one could be 0. Well, what do you notice? They're exactly the same. So when you solve both of those equations, you're going to get x equals -7 for both of those, right? Yeah, so in this case, your x value is exactly the same, so you have one solution, x equals -7. And Emily, just like you did, you said, all right, if you tried the square root method, you also get the exact same solution. So you'll have situations where you've got different possible methods that you can use. All right, good. Let's look at number 7. Number 7. All right, so let me get rid of this over here. So if we look at number 7, Fatima, remember, if we're solving quadratic equations, what form do they have to be written in?
Can I just tell you what I did?
Yeah. 1 second. I want to think about. Remember that if we're going to use the zero product property, then that means, what does the equation have to look like? What does it have to be equal to? The equation.
0.
It's got to be equal to 0. Does this equation show it being equal to 0 right now?
No.
No. So, what was your first step, Fatima?
Adding 36 to the other side.
Good. So if you add 36 to the other side, then you've created an equation that has it equal to 0. Then you can think about using the zero product property. So when you add 36 to both sides, hold on, someone's coming into the meeting. Good, Desiree finally got in. So when you add 36 to both sides, it then gives you x squared plus 12x. Don't let me forget the 12x right here. Plus 36 equals 0. Well, now that should look like number 6.
Oh, yeah.
So could we now factor this into two binomials?
Yeah.
Yep. And when you factor that, what do you get?
X plus
times x plus 6. Oh, plus,
Yeah, that factors also into, that's a perfect square trinomial, isn't it? So it becomes x plus 6 times x plus 6. Could we use your square root method on this, Emily?
yeah.
Yeah, just like you did number 6. Or, now that we know the zero product property, that means either this factor or this factor has to be 0 in order to get 0 over here. So you can make each of those equal to 0. Well, in this case, they're both the same, so just say x plus 6 equals 0, subtract 6 from both sides, and you get x equals negative 6. So that would be the solution to that equation, or the 0 of the function. You might see it being called zeros of the function. And if you were to check it, take your negative 6, go back to the top. Well, if x is negative 6, what's negative 6 times negative 6?
36.
36. Put it down here. And then what's 12 times negative 6?
Negative 36.
Negative 72.
Oh.
And then 36 plus negative 72 gives you the negative 36 that you're supposed to get. All right, look at 8. Saying, all right, it's equal to 0, so that's good. So now that I've got it equal to 0, what's my first step? I want to try to factor it, all right, and then see if I can use the zero product property. So when I factor that, you guys probably know all of your factoring by now. That's got to be x plus something and x plus something because it's all addition. And then think the factors of 10 that have a sum of 7. You came up with 5 and 2?
Yeah.
Good. So, can we use the square root method now, Emily?
No.
No, because now we've got two different binomials. So this is where the zero product property comes in helpful. That means either this binomial has to be 0 or the other binomial has to be 0 in order to make it all equal to 0. So, write your two equations. X plus 5 has to be equal to 0, or x plus 2 has to be equal to 0, and then when you subtract 5 from both sides, you get x equals negative 5, or on this side, subtract 2 from both sides, you get x equals negative 2. There are your solutions to that equation. Emily, is it already really easy?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Desiree, how you doing? All right, hope she's doing okay. If she types a question, you guys let me know because I'm not watching the chat.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, good, good. So either stop us or type a chat and let us know if anybody has a question. So on 9, if I want to use a zero product property, what do I need to see on this equation? We need to see it equal to 0. So hopefully you would agree the first step would be to subtract 8 from both sides. So that's going to leave us with x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. Now that we've got a trinomial, think about factoring. I have a minus at the end, so I know one of them is going to have to be plus, one's going to have to be minus. These have to be x and x. What are factors of negative 8 that will give us a sum of 2? Anybody?
Negative 4. Positive 4 and negative 2.
Yeah, positive 4.
Positive 4 and negative 2.
Good. If you do plus 4 and then minus 2, then your sum is going to be plus 4 and minus 2. That'll go together to give you the plus 2x. Now, you know one of these has to be equal to 0, so you say x plus 4 is 0, or x minus 2 is 0. And then when you solve that, subtract 4 from both sides, and you get x equals negative 4. And on this one, what do you have to do, Desiree?
Add 2.
Exactly. Add 2 to both sides and you would get 2. So you know then that the zeros of this function or the solutions to this equation would be negative 4 or 2. And if you were to check it, substitute both those values, you'll see it'll give you a true equation at the top. Alright, 13. You've got function notation, but that's still the same thing. F of x, remember, is your y value. So if I want to solve this, what does y need to be?
0.
Y needs to be 0, exactly. So your first step would be to make y equal to 0, and then write your equation. Now you can use the zero product property. This one's a little different because your x's have coefficients, but you're still doing it the same way. Either this first binomial has to be 0, or the second one has to be 0. So your equations would be 4x minus 3 is 0, or 2x minus 1 is 0. And then when you solve that, your first step would be add 3 to both sides, and when you add 3 to both sides, you get 4x equals 3. Last step, divide both sides by 4, and you get x equals 3/4. And then over here, when you solve this, add 1 to both sides, you get 2x equals 1, and then divide both sides by 2, you get x equals 1/2. So your solutions to that quadratic equation would be 3/4 or 1/2. You guys good? Alright. Instead of x, we have p, but you still do it exactly the same way. F of p represents your y value, so make that 0. And then we have p squared minus 2p minus 24 for our trinomial. That means we want to hopefully factor this into two binomials. It's going to be p and p. One's going to have to be addition, one's going to have to be subtraction to make negative. So what are the factors of negative 24 that have a sum of negative 2? Anybody?
Negative 6 and 4.
We need minus 6 and plus 4. Alright, so yeah, so now you factored it, you've got two binomials, so that means either this is 0 or that is 0. Write your two equations, p plus 4 is 0, or p minus 6 is 0. On this one, subtract 4 from both sides, we get negative 4. On the other one, add 6 to both sides, we get positive 6. That's simple. How you doing, Fatima?
I'm good.
You got these all right?
Yes.
Desiree, you're good?
Mm-hmm.
All right, good. On 17. Again, just make our y value, our f of z, 0, and then think about how we can factor that. We have minus 7 in the middle. We've got a positive at the end. So the only way to multiply two numbers to get positive and add them to get negative is for them both to be minus. I hope you agree.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so factors of 12 that'll give you 7.
Negative 4 and negative 3.
Good. Factors of... So, negative 4 times negative 3 gives you 12. When you add them together, it gives you negative. Are you guys gonna... How come you guys didn't tell me what I did wrong here? That's not supposed to be x.
It's supposed to be z.
Yeah. Make sure you use the right
I'm
one.
just writing it all down.
Yes. Alright, yeah.
I put the z though. I put everything to x because I kept doing that, so I just kept it to x.
Alright, no, we'll definitely get the right answer, but just make sure and pay attention. Just make sure and pay attention to your variables, because at the end we need to make sure and call it z and not x. Alright, so that means each of these has to be 0, so we would say z minus 4 is equal to 0, or z minus 3 is 0. On this one, add 4 to both sides, so we get z is 4. On this one, add 3 to both sides, and we get 3. Wait, is that it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Wow. Alright,
Can
so
you go to the ones that I missed?
yeah, hold on one second. Let me stop this recording and then I'll